Hello everyone. Here's my introductory tutorial video for Rally in the hopes to get everyone up to speed a little more quickly. What we see here is simply the first thing I see when I log into Rally, and you'll see something a little bit different. You'll probably be asked a question on your initial login which asks you whether or not you're an administrative user or if you're just a general user. You'll want to select General User, since that's what you guys will be doing on a day-to-day basis. And Rally will then give you some customizations to optimize your UI to make your experience a little more easier as a general user and not as an administrative user. Once you do that, you should hopefully see a screen like that. If you don't, just go to your My Home tab and you should see this Getting Started option here. Make sure that's selected and you'll see this Intro to Rally page. Something I think you guys should go through if you haven't already done so. It just gives you probably like a 1-minute introduction to Rally and introduces some of the important concepts. These concepts we've already gone over to a certain extent, but I'll reiterate some of them here. The big concept is your backlog and your user story. The backlog is a prioritized list of work items, and a user story represents one of those work items. Once you have some user stories entered into your backlog, you can then pull a user story into what's called an iteration. An iteration just is a fixed length of time which you use to track progress and to say I need this much time to get a certain block of work done. Once you've got user stories within an iteration, you can start entering tasks for that user story to get more finely grained and define more closely what work is required in order to get that user story completed. As you progress through the iteration, Rally will provide some reports to give you a good sense of the status of how that iteration is going. So as you go through, some tasks will be marked as completed, others will be marked as blocked. We should rarely have that, but if you do, there's a way to do that. And some of them will just be in progress. Finally, you can have this last link here to learn more about using Rally. And I do recommend that you guys do peruse this a little bit. It is optional, you don't absolutely have to, but if you have some time, it's a good idea to maybe get a little more information about what Rally is, what Agile and Scrum are all about. I'm not going to go through any of that here, I'll leave that up to you. Hopefully my little video here will be enough to get everyone up to speed fairly quickly, as it should be, more specific to our needs. So the first tab we're going to look at, or the second tab we'll look at, is the Backlog tab. And this shows all the itemized work items. We have a few things already in here. We've already pulled a number of work items into the plan, which is the next tab, which we'll talk about shortly. But this Backlog tab is where any of us can enter in any kind of work item we feel has not been captured yet. So any ideas we have, just throw them in here and we'll sort them out. So one of the ideas we had was dividing some of the data entry work out by composer. So we can enter something like that here, divide data entry by composer. I can add that inline relatively quickly by just hitting the Add button. Or I can hit this Add with Details button, which will bring up this separate window and allow me to add a further description about that user story. I do encourage everyone to at least consider using that. It won't be necessary all the time. If the user story is very straightforward, a simple title will do. But don't be afraid to add more description to that story to put all the information in there, so that anyone who's working on that user story has enough information to get that job done. It can be easy to miss that information because you got to keep in mind that some of these stories may not be looked at for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks down the road. They won't necessarily be pulled into the next immediate iteration. And you're the one who enters that backlog item may not be the one working on it either. So try and avoid, or keep in mind that you don't want people to be sending you emails to gather more detail about the story. Try and put enough detail in there so someone can run with it. I'm not going to enter anything here. I'm going to leave that up to you guys to enter this particular story and any others you feel are important. So I'll just cancel that. Once we have a backlog, we can then move to the planning phase. On the planning tab, we'll see two different sides, two different columns basically to this particular tab. The backlog column and the planning column. This backlog column represents pretty much what we've already seen on the backlog tab and repeats much of that information here. The planning column is interesting because it's where we've pulled in a lot of the work items from the backlog and we started scheduling them in an iteration. So right now we're in our iteration number 2, which I've called Sprint 2. You'll notice here if I want to add any of these particular user stories, I can just grab it, pull it over here, and I can place it in any kind of priority I want. I'm not going to do that here since I've already pretty much made this particular iteration the way I think it should be. But that gives you an idea of how you move something from the backlog into a plan. Once we have all user stories in a particular iteration, we can start actually adding tasks for that iteration, or tasks for those particular user stories. Before we do that, however, let's just look at Sprint 1, and I wanted just to highlight the state. You notice everything in Sprint 1 is in what Rally calls the accepted state. And accepted means everyone on the team agrees that this particular story is done to the team's satisfaction. There are three or four particular states. Every user story starts off in the defined state. So when a user story is new, it's got no tasks on it yet. The user story has only been defined but has no further information in it. Once we do start adding tasks to it, it'll move to the, and people start working on those tasks, it moves into the in progress state. As all the tasks within that user story get completed, it'll go to the completed state, which indicates that whoever worked on that story has completed all tasks to their satisfaction. Keep in mind that you don't necessarily need to have one person working on all the tasks in the story. All the tasks can be shared between any number of the team members. So in order to make sure the whole team is believes that all the tasks are done, that's where you have some kind of demo, and that's where I've scheduled some end of sprint kind of demos of the software where I can get feedback from everybody to ensure that everyone accepts the progress or the completion of some of the tasks that I'll be working on. And that applies to all of us. And we don't have to have that kind of discussion at the end of a sprint. For example, if someone writes a document for the spreadsheet document and makes some changes to it, send out an email to the team saying, guys, can you look at the document? I've made these changes. Can you give me a green light on that? Once the green light is given from all the team members, we can mark that particular user story as complete, or as accepted, sorry. And that can be done anytime during the sprint. Hopefully we have some things accepted as we go, and we don't have like a bulk acceptance right at the end of the sprint. And you'll notice that's what happened here in our Sprint 1. Okay, moving right along. Once we have all that in place, then we can start entering tasks. So to do that, I'm going to click on this story here, and it'll go to the details of the story. Now here's where we had some confusion. There's a difference between children of a user story and tasks. We'll rarely, or we probably won't ever have to use children, but I think I'll just explain it here quickly for the team. Children represents a hierarchical view of any stories or any of the work items. Some work items may first get entered into the backlog as very large in nature, like there's no refinement to them, and that's okay. The backlog is meant to capture any ideas from the team, from anybody, not just necessarily from direct team members. So it may not have any, it may not be broken down to any granularity, and that particular story can be so big in nature it's just too hard for anyone to get their head around to start actually doing work. So the purpose of a child is to take that large story and break it up into smaller stories to any level of hierarchy that we may feel is appropriate. That then gives the team a better, that That gives the team the opportunity to look at some of the broken up stories and say, oh good, I can grab that story, break it up into tasks, and do that, say, in a week or two's kind of time frame. You don't want something so big where you can't even imagine where the end will be. That's when things start getting out of control. So that's the purpose of children. We probably won't need that because our product isn't complex enough. I think everything we can have pretty much in a flat view. In a similar way to a simple to-do list, really. But what will be important to us is task. So I'll leave the concept of children for now. If you guys want to ask any further questions on that, you can send me an email if you like. But for the most part, I don't think we'll need to worry about it. You should never have to enter a child, and you shouldn't have to click on this to look at children. But you will have to look at tasks. So I've clicked on the tasks link here, and you'll see there's 2 tasks applicable to this story. And a task is a very small item of work. You'll notice a trend here. You go from kind of a larger definition of a story, and then you break it down into, short, durable, or doable tasks. So each task you generally don't want to be any more than, say, a day's, maybe 12 hours of work, a couple days of work kind of thing, 2 or 3 days of work. That's kind of your top end for a task. If it's any bigger than that, you should consider breaking up into smaller tasks. I've entered 2 tasks here. This is a story that I'll be working on for sure, making the web application public for trial and demo purposes. I will eventually have many more tasks here, but these are 2 fairly obvious ones that came to mind just for the purposes of this demo. For example, installing MySQL on the public server. That's going to be, I got to get the database installed on the server. So if I have already entered that task, but let's just do an edit on that task, and you'll notice I've even added a little description here. AWS is the name of the service provider. They're the guys that are providing my development public machine, and it's where we'll be using our public kind of demonstrations. We'll be using the AWS provider. And just from reading some of their documentation and getting used to them, I've noticed that they provide a kind of wizard-like installation of various databases, MySQL being one of them. So that already gives me a bit of insight about how difficult this particular story will be, or this particular task will be. If it's very user-friendly and there's a wizard all behind it, I should hopefully have to just click a few buttons, and the server will go off and install MySQL for me with minimal hassle upon myself. So that helps me estimate some of the hours. If I didn't have any wizard, I probably would increase the hours, but I've estimated at 4. If there were no wizard, I may estimate that at 8. You don't have to be exact here. Estimations are just for our own purposes and help to communicate to the rest of the team how much work we feel is left. And that helps us better plan and schedule when something will get done, and then of course when we can start working on the next thing. Probably the most important thing here though is that to-do number of hours left, or the to-do list, or not to-do list, but the number of hours left to do on that particular task. You generally don't change the estimate, but you will quite often change what is left to do. If your initial estimate is off, then one thing you'll notice is that this to-do number will either go higher than your initial estimate, or it can even be completed in less than my initial 4 hours. It can go either way. But as time goes on, hopefully we'll get better at that kind of estimating. Okay, if you want to add a task, I've already added, so that's how you edit a task. To add one, you got to go to this action drop-down menu on the top right. You'll find a task action, and you'll want to select new task, and here's where you can enter one. I'm not going to enter one right now. You can just put whatever you want in here, and here's where you enter your estimate of some hours. Fairly straightforward. Okay, so we've entered our backlog, we've created an iteration, we've moved some user stories into that iteration, and we've even created some tasks. Once we have all that, we can then start tracking our progress as we work on those tasks. So, as I say, okay, I'm going to start working on something, I'm going to pull that in progress. I can manage some of those tasks here, and I can say, oh, let's look at this. I'm going to start installing that MySQL on that public server. So I'm going to mark that in progress. So that shows up now here as green, and you'll see it still shows as 8 hours. So let's say I've worked on it for a little bit of time, and I may then want to drop that down to 1 hour. It automatically shows here there's 5 hours left. Once I'm done, I can change the state from in progress to completed for that task. It'll automatically up that task to 0. I don't have to change that. And you come back to here and you'll notice there's 4 hours left, and it shows the user story as 50% complete. So that simply means that half of the tasks have been marked as completed. Of course, time will go on. I'll pick up the next task. I'll eventually complete that, mark it as completed, and once all tasks are completed, Rally will automatically shuffle that particular user story to the completed column. And now this particular item, user story, should be ready for a demo. So that's the basic process, and what I've done for the previous sprint when tracking some of my own work items to demonstrate to you guys. And that's something you can use as well. For example, this item here, ensure the Google spreadsheet accurately reflects the data that needs to be stored in the database. One of you can pick that up, modify that spreadsheet with all the data that we feel is appropriate. For example, range, we need to have 2 columns for that. And also we need to either understand that those other columns have multiple entries. And are we going to include tessitura, for example? Things like that. Anyone can pick that up, and you can use that to track your progress. You could add your own tasks to that, and and we call all they can see and have a good idea of when that'll get done. And then that'll help me, because this particular story I'll need, or will be helpful when I start doing this one, because then I'll have to make sure the database properly reflects the data we want to actually store there. So one of the things that came up from the demo at the end of Sprint 1 was that I need to make some changes, to the database to add some more information, and to the actual UI to break that up appropriately. So this is how we kind of get some synergy between the teams. Alright, that's about that. Let me, I want to go back and let me undo what I just did here. I'll put this back to, so I don't forget. Find, oops. In fact, it might be easier doing it this way. Define 4 hours, check. Put that back to 4 hours, check. Okay. Now, alright, that's going back to the beginning kind of our sprint. That covers, I think, most of the important topics. There are other things we can talk about, but I'm going to leave them for now until everyone gets started and hopefully a little more comfortable with the tool. I don't want you guys to worry about too much right off the hop. And maybe for the next sprint, I'll introduce maybe a couple of other concepts when you guys are more comfortable with the overall, just general use of the tool. Alright guys, thank you for watching. Hopefully this wasn't too boring, and I'll see you later.